Hello, I'm Nia Hampton, founder of the Black Femme Supremacy Film Festival, and I'm so excited to bring you all a very special conversation powered by HBO POV entitled Worldbuilding for a Universal Black Femme Protaganist. And we're going to be in conversation with Gina Atwater, a filmmaker and former staff writer for Westworld, and Alliah, Sophia Mourad, who is the EP of HBO's Betty. So welcome, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Cute, I see the numbers coming in. So I guess I will let you all introduce yourself in a way that you feel comfortable with. And then I will get into the icebreaker conversation.
Anything you want us to add in our introduction?
No, just I don't want it to be like, too much. Just whatever you want us to know right now in 2020, whatever you feel is relevant, you can just let us know. Because we already ran your bios on social media. So if people are tuning in, they know who you are. But what do you want us to know today, right now?
What do I want you to know today, right now? Well, to be honest, being a Black woman right now in America is pretty heartbreaking. And one thing that feels super empowering is making a story with a beautiful, diverse group of women from New York. And that's what I'm really excited about. I'm really excited about Betty. We're right in the midst of kicking off. And I'm excited for this conversation tonight. I love Westworld, so I'm clearly a huge fan of Gina. And I'm just happy to be here.
Yes, that's a great answer.
Thank you.
I guess I'll say that what I'm excited about in 2020 is I am currently in development on a number of TV shows and films that have been years in the making. And I'm excited for people to see them, even though I can't really talk about them. But I do feel like after years and years of trying to get Black-centered stories on screen, it's looking like it's going to happen, and lots and lots of different portrayals of different kinds of Black films. So I'm very excited about that. Look out for that, and happy to chat about Westworld today.
I actually was just watching your episode right before this. So I started the first season, I got to 5, and then I kind of didn't have time to get all the way in, so I jumped. And I still was getting it. I was like, okay. But I'm also I just watched Lovecraft last night, and I'm in this place where I'm accepting that I won't necessarily know what's going to happen in each episode. I'm learning how to watch TV as anthology now, so that was helpful. Before we get into the HBO universe, though, I want to ask a question for you both. If you don't already know, this conversation is inspired by the essay In Search of Our Mother's Gardens by Alice Walker. And I won't read the whole thing, but I implore whoever's watching to definitely go and check that piece of work out because it's very timely. And based off of that piece of work, my question to both of you is, if you didn't work in the television and film space, what would you be doing? And this could be, worst case scenario, best case scenario. But if you weren't able to create in the way that you're able to create right now, what would be happening with your life?
Yeah, I for the longest time, I could not answer that question. Film and TV was the only thing I wanted to do. But as a result of the last couple of years, I think it's an easy question for me to answer. I would be in the nonprofit space for sure. LA in particular has an insane foster care system with a lot of kids who need help, and I've been able to find my place within that. And so I think I'd be doing that full time, either that or nonprofit theater, or both is probably what I'd be doing.
Okay.
I think I'd probably be a therapist. Talk about that being my backup plan, because so much of being a producer is just negotiating in conversations, whether it's for something you need someone to want or something you need to get more money for. It's just a constant conversation. And I love people. That's also why I think if I wasn't a therapist, maybe I'd be like a casting person. I love street casting.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think I can see that when I think about like what both of your stories are about, like the shows you've worked on, how they kind of, I'm thinking of Westworld and the way that these hosts are not necessarily children, but they're not fully realized adults and they're in somewhat of an orphanage. So that's a really interesting connection. And then like obviously Betty is its own universe in that the street casting was literally a central part. And that wasn't you in that scene, was it?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't want to like assume. And I was like, wait, I think that's her. But like.
But that was me like right after the baby. I will say.
Oh, okay.
I'm back to pre-baby.
Oh, I love when shows
I did do a lot of street casting I did a lot of street casting for the film and for the show.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one person I found on the street is going to be on our show this year. And I love her. She's like a little baby Angelina Jolie.
Oh, okay.
Like, so tiny, but you like express so much.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I'm going to let that kind of segue into the next question, which is about how you began to work on your HBO show. But I want you to kind of talk about how Skate Kitchen led to Betty.
Well, I mean, oddly enough, it was not as difficult as it would seem, but I think after Skate Kitchen came out, everything that we got, and I mean, we got so much positive press, but so many people were just so curious to learn more about the girls that I think it was just like a natural progression to make it into a show.
Yeah.
And when they approached Crystal and, she teamed up with some writers she really liked, and it just came pretty organically. I think even making the film, we always wanted to spend more time on these like improv moments that were just natural conversations with the girls. And what's driven Betty to even go to another season is just the constant inspiration we find from them. And so many of our stories lend on real stories from their lives. And yeah, that's the answer to my question.
Okay.
That's how it became a TV show.
That sounds very easy. No.
I mean, it was
a problem-free, carefree transition.
It definitely wasn't carefree. But I will say, when Crystal first showed me the short, I was working at 150, which is an incubator that was out of Warner's. And when we saw the short, we're like, you should totally make this into a TV show. Like, these girls are so interesting. But Crystal really wanted to make a feature, and she had a bigger idea, and obviously it worked out because Crystal Moselle is a dream weaver for sure. But yeah, that's how it became a show. I always thought it was going to be a good show. It's the only way you get to really know people.
Yeah, true. So Gina, how did you begin working on Westworld?
Yeah, I kind of fell into sci-fi. I came out of film school at Columbia in New York thinking I was going to be making stuff more like Betty. But I did not know how on earth someone was supposed to make rent in New York. So a friend of mine suggested me for a job in LA, and I took it to move out to LA. I was an assistant at CAA, an agency, which is a very tough job, but teaches you the town very quickly. And after about 5 months there, I became J.J. Abrams' assistant. And I was his assistant for about 2.5 years and was writing and directing the whole time. He was supporting me in that. And the timing kind of worked out really well that he was ending Star Wars Episode 7 around the time that Westworld was becoming a room. And I'd been writing the whole time. So I submitted my materials to first the TV department at Bad Robot, and then to Jonah and Lisa at Westworld, and came aboard the show in season 1 as a writer's assistant, and then was up to staff for season 2 and 3. So yeah, I fell into it by needing a job in LA and then somehow ending up in a sci-fi universe.
Nice. So So you fell into sci-fi. Does that mean you weren't necessarily a fan beforehand, or was it something that you felt like you had to kind of study to immerse yourself in? Or
I gravitate more to grounded sci-fi, and Westworld is that, I think, but stuff like, like Children of Men, whereas sci-fi is taking a bit of a backseat to things that you're talking about on almost like a Shakespearean level. I'm not insanely interested in like technology and space, like things like that. So yeah, I did have to watch things and study things that I ordinarily would not have done. But at the same time, Westworld, there was a lot of stuff that I naturally gravitated to that lent itself to Westworld. There's a lot of Shakespeare in Westworld. There's a lot of allegory in Westworld. There's East of Eden, the John Steinbeck novel, and a couple other novels and films that aren't sci-fi at all, like the Iliad. So that is like where I love to play. So it worked well because those things are within Westworld.
Yeah, the more I watch the show, the more I see how classical it is. Like, and I think that's the thing about science fiction that is I'm like a speculative fiction writer. Like I love Octavia Butler and things like that, but I'm always thinking of how science fiction and speculative fiction is really just an exaggeration of what we're already experiencing.
Yeah.
So as things kind of get more speculative fiction and different in life, it's really interesting to see where people are drawing inspiration from. I am going to kind of slightly pivot to Alliah and talk about some of the inspiration for story that you've come across in Betty, aside from like the reality of, because I feel like the difference with Westworld and Betty is like one is kind of a subculture that we know exists, but we might not necessarily know the detail of its existence. Like you might see that one girl at the skate park, but no one is necessarily wondering what's going on when she leaves. Whereas Westworld is like this entire universe that some people might not even be able to conceive of. So in the same way that Gina had to kind of dig in the crates a bit, what are you thinking about when Betty is being created, aside from kind of the more obvious like skate culture influences?
Well, I mean, for us, it's really about the girls. It's about setting them aside as individuals and exploring the stories that, cross into their own lives, coming out to your parents, finding the opportunity to get a new job, learning how to be independent, learning how to stand up for yourself, like all these things that we've all gone through in our lives. And I think we're just seeing it from their perspective and bringing that to life. But that's definitely where we draw inspiration from, and from our own lives. Like we are so, like, I think the best thing about Betty is that, the girls are so intricate, are such an intricate part to like how we actually build the stories. And they come into the writer's room, they share their ideas. And I think that's what's made our world feel so authentic, because it's really grounded in what happens to them in real life. Like, I think a perfect example of that was last season we had this like stereotypical photo shoot where Indigo's character is in a photo shoot where they're making all of the women just play like overhyped stereotypes, like face tattoos. They're just meant to look like cholos and like gang members. And I remember Johnny texting me that day, and I was at work, and I just was thinking like, well, I mean, like, how do you walk out of like a very high profile magazine photo shoot when you're like a new model and you're with all these other big models and none of them are walking out? And she was just like literally, she's like, F this, like, I'm out. And she left. She walked right out and could have cared less. And so many of those other people stayed, and that issue actually came out. And like that really happening is so like indicative of how like we all talk about like change happening, but like it happens incrementally. And like the fashion industry is like one aspect that I think suffers the most from just like a horrible culture around diversity, especially the way like they talk about diversity. It's really, it's just appalling. And that scene was something that like meant so much to me, because seeing her having to go through that, I'm like, what the hell? Like, it's crazy. Like, that was only 2 years ago. Like, you think that stuff stopped happening, but it hasn't. But yeah.
Yeah, that was I thought that scene made so much sense because that character didn't seem to care regardless. Like she was very like ambivalent. It wasn't like modeling with her dream job. And
Yeah,
then kind of we find out that it's not like she's doing it for money either. So I was like, oh, that's cool. And also like visually the way it looked. It was very cute, I guess, to see her in like that look outside of that space.
so funny. So funny. I remember shooting that scene and she was just like her hair was so heavy. She was like all sulking, like, oh, this heavy hair and I have to skate. I'm like, oh, come on, you look so cute. Like she looked adorable. Even though it was horrible, she looked so adorable at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it was an epic scene. I definitely remember like thinking about screenshots of that moment.
She coat. Oof.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
nice.
So Gina, I want to ask, because I feel like Alliah, you kind of began to touch on how your show considers Black femmes when creating your world. Gina, can you talk about what that experience was like on Westworld? Was there consideration for Black femme experiences when that was happening, or what?
Well, yes and no. There are no, Black femmes at the EP level, at the showrunner level. So people are not coming from that perspective when they're conceiving of the world and the characters. So the Black femmes on the show actually were cast out of consideration for what would be the most interesting version of the roles. For instance, Tessa Thompson's character, Lisa Joy, very much wanted to take the traits and attributes that we love in middle-aged white men, but think are like horrible in women, and give it to a like 30s Black woman. So ambition and ruthlessness and drive. And she wanted to make a comment about, if you have a problem with her, why is it you don't have a problem with the middle-aged white man that is her counterpart doing the exact same thing? Why is that? Tandy Newton's character, I believe when they wrote the role of the Madam, they didn't have an ethnicity in mind, but gave it to Tandy, and then suddenly the part takes on more weight than it had before, because now she is embodying a Black female immigrant in the West as well. And in addition to the other stereotype that the in-world writers have given her of being the madam at the place, she's now taking on more because of who the actress is. Same with Jeffrey Wright. So yeah, because I'm not there when they're deciding who the characters are, it's really in the casting that they start to consider, okay, this is a Black femme, what does that mean?
That's interesting.
Yeah. I guess, Alliah, could you talk about the contrast, since you are the EP?
From not being an EP and being an EP?
Sure. Like, because I would assume you have more power now. So a lot of that.
100%, but with more money comes more problems. Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely at a different level now than I was last year. And I mean, I love my Betty family. I'm really grateful to have the position that I have now. And I will say last year, I felt kind of like sometimes I wasn't given the opportunity to speak, and it wasn't because I'm just going to stop there. I'm like, I need to definitely catch myself. But there was definitely a difference in being a co-producer to being an executive producer. Me and Crystal have been friends for years, and she's always brought me into the fold and has always really fought and respected my opinion and gone out of her way to make sure that other people understand that. And what I meant to say before is that some people don't always respect that. And I think that creates a different environment that you work in when, your boss has to tell someone else who thinks they're boss that my voice matters. And this year, that's not a problem. And I have a way bigger seat at the table that Crystal was like very much like in support of. And it feels very different, like I don't feel, there's like there's like a whole conscious difference that happens in the way that like you even come to work, in the way that you feel like your voice matters. And I think that it's been such a beautiful experience being able to like sit in on the writer's room and like even be able to like work things out and like figuring out our departments. And, you know, I'm so lucky that I have like a group of people around me that are still here that always respected me and always treated me like I was a voice that mattered. And this year, it just feels so much more different. And, you know, with that, it feels there's a lot more pressure in so many ways, but I'm so grateful to have the ability to like go to work with like your best friend and like know that like they have your back. And that's a huge difference than most work environments I ever go to be quite honest. But in the sense of like how we conceive the stories, like my ideas and my voice is like infused into Betty and 100% matters in like a way different way than it mattered before. And that makes me really happy. You know, it changes the way that you perceive the thing that you're making when you feel like you're an integral part of the process, you know? So yeah.
Nice. Okay. Oh, we're not quite at questions yet. Thank you.
That's a good question.
So that is a good question, and I do want to let folks know we will be getting there soon. But I will let you know when it's time for that. Gina, so can you talk about your experience as the sole Black woman in the writer's room? I'm assuming there were moments where it could have been awkward, as you know, there are some Black female characters, but you're the only Black woman. So could you speak to any tension, if there was any, or just any feelings around like what that had to have been like?
Yeah, I'll try to mine my memory. I was the only Black female in the writer's room. There is another creative producer who is also a Black female. So we did have each other. She's not in the room, but she was always just down the hall. So like, I would run it by her. But Westworld is a very democratic writer's room, and it's not the case with all rooms. Some rooms, it's like, you know, okay, so here's the executive producers, here's this consulting producers, here's the supervising producer, here's the executive story editor, and story editor and staff writer. And in that order, we want to hear from people, and we only want to hear big ideas from the more upper level writers. We don't want the writer's assistant or the staff writer to talk at all. Some rooms are like that. In the Westworld room, it was never like that. And even though I'm the only Black femme there, the room is very diverse in terms of LGBTQ representation, diverse in terms of Latinx representation, men, women, diverse in age. So kind of everyone there is the only one of some kind of group. So I never felt like I was like, oh no, I'm having to speak on behalf of all Black femmes everywhere. I didn't feel like that because everybody in the room was representative of something that the rest of us had no experience with. So I found that kind of diversity in the room to actually be a very good thing. So I had a positive experience with it.
Nice. Okay. Alliah, can you tell us about the changes for the Betty writers room in season 2?
Yeah, I mean, we had the room that we started with was amazing. And I think that like what Crystal really wanted to do this year and what we've been talking about throughout the year was like having just a diversity in age and having more women of color, like just period. We wanted the room to be composed of women that look like the women that were on the screen. And that's really what we did. There, we brought back Moshe, who was a writer last year. And then the rest of the room is composed of women of color and a writer that Krista grew up with whose name is Ben. Yeah. So there's a lot of diversity in the room, which I'm super grateful for.
Nice. So can you talk a little bit about production and COVID, since, you know, that's happening next and we're all kind of wondering. I know for me, all of these great shows that we've been having the past year and a half, it's like, what's going to happen now? Are people writing masks into their their dilemmas, like what's going to happen in these worlds?
It's interesting because I feel like I've heard some shows are doing just like nude masks, like skin tone masks, but it's really a different beast. The way you deal with background, the way we deal with locations, just going on our tech scout alone, there's only, I think, 4 people to a van at a time when you used to have like 14 people, or at least 10, 14 people in a van. Mm-hmm. So it feels like you're constantly moving a small city no matter what you're doing. So like we were doing director scouts last week, and there are probably 8 or 9 vans to every location that we went to. And that's just a lot. It's a lot. So it's definitely different. People have to get tested quite often, and it feels very fragile. And, we have a particularly interesting cast that's composed mostly of like young women and men who are often skateboarders. So that's a challenge before COVID. So now it's also, we're constantly reminding them about social distancing and just how fragile the whole process is. One person falls down, we all fall down, and, it's hard to pick back up. It's a lot of money. That's just the reality of it. And safety is the most important part. That's the only thing you do. And we employ so many people. So it also feels like so much pressure that we don't do anything to mess that up because of COVID and how many people weren't working. So it's a lot. We could use a therapist. One more line item,
Gina, I know that you were kind of mentioning you're in development or pre-production for some things. How much can you talk about, and how has what you're working on or we're going to be working on affected by COVID?
Yeah, I'm allegedly directing a feature film. We'll see. That was targeted for March of this upcoming year. But it's super, super low budget. And so my hesitation with us making the date that we're supposed to make has been that I believe in safety above all things. I'm employing actors of color in more high-risk groups. My family and extended family and friends of my family have been affected by COVID. Multiple people have died. I know how serious it is.
Wow.
So the talks we've been having have been to look at what people are doing right now, to see how much of the budget, if they are being responsible and if they are actually caring about the crew and doing what they're supposed to do, how much of the budget is actually added on top. And at this point, I don't think we can afford it. So I think that's been a big difference between like how COVID's affecting indie films versus like TV. Like if I were staffed on a TV show right now, I feel like my experience would be, we would just be throwing money at it. And just trying to make it work and throwing money at it. But I'm trying to direct a very, very low budget movie. And so I don't think the money is there. So we may be pushing, and that's just the reality of it. But I would much rather be safe. I would much rather have the budget go to the story and the production value than to constant testing of everybody. So yeah, that's been my reality of just having to be patient and maybe saying, we're not going to hit our dates.
Wow. It's like this industry is already so stressful. Like making a movie or a film or a TV show or whatever is already so hard, and now you have to navigate a pandemic. Yeah. All right, I'm going to throw another heavy question at you since the mood is so somber. So we have a good understanding of the Black women's experience in corporate America, but not so much in the arts when it comes to TV and film. Can you, I guess, speak to what your experience has been like so far? And I'm not necessarily asking for you to say it's been good or bad, but I think we're in a unique time for Black femme in TV where, like, I don't know who's watched the last episode of Lovecraft, but like we've never seen anything like that on TV. Nope. So we've come a long way, but there's still so much more to be done. And we know how fragile this moment is. We know that just because it's good right now doesn't mean it'll be good next year, and et cetera, et cetera. So I guess, talk more about where you are in 2020 when you look at like the grand scheme of how far you've come as a Black woman in TV and film.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Lovecraft Country episode from this past week, because that was very much about, you know, her repeatedly saying, I feel like I've shrunk myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I've not taken up the space and been as big as I want to be. And I feel like that has overall been my experience in this industry. I feel like very similar to other, you know, corporate structures, things that your white male counterpart can get away with, being strong, not taking notes, being singularly focused. Everybody looks at that and they're like, great, he knows what he's doing. A Black woman does it and they're like, oh, she's difficult.
Yeah.
So having to navigate all of these spaces in which you know that when you come into the space, subconsciously you are being judged much harsher. So having to navigate notes that don't make any sense, having to like navigate all kinds of feedback and what you want to be doing with your career and the kind of things you want to be making when everyone else is like, oh no, but the pinnacle that you want to be doing is this very white dude superhero thing. That's what you want. Everything going to that. And you're like, no, actually, there are other spaces I would like to play in. And everyone just like, that doesn't make any sense because we've been trained that you're going in a certain direction. So I think this year, I hope that the changes that I've seen have not been performative and that they are long lasting, because I have seen that people are much more willing to hear my voice and the stories that I've been wanting to tell all along. And I have been able, kind of like Hippolyta, to be a little more forceful and saying, you know, that doesn't make sense. You're coming from a biased perspective, and what you're telling me to do doesn't make sense for this world or this character, and actually being listened to now as opposed to being seen as difficult. So I hope that trend continues. It's still not perfect or amazing, but it's better than it was, I think.
Nice. What about you, Alliah?
Well, I think I remember when we were doing the film, we were doing the feature for Skate Kitchen. I got into an argument with the producers because the credit they wanted to give me was just like such BS. And I knew how much time I was dedicating to it. I knew how much I was valuable to the way that Crystal works and the way that she shoots, and I knew how fragile all the girls were and how the two producers definitely did not know how to speak their language, that I was being kind of like used in a certain way, but then given this like very small little role. And like that one moment of me standing up for myself, I was like, I'm not ever going to let this happen to me again, blah, 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 blah. But then you get so wrapped up in like, just like our industry can be so rigid sometimes in what you have to know for people to give you the respect that you deserve. And I think what I've been fortunate to have is like people that don't just judge me on like what I've done, but the way that I operate and the things that they see me accomplish in real life with them. And I think being able to go from like a smaller role to like the role I have now, I see such a difference in my whole like perspective of just like how I deal with like almost everything in my life. Like I feel like I've spent so much time like feeling so much smaller than my counterparts only because they were white men and they maybe were working for like 2 years longer than me, but I definitely had accomplished way more than them.
Yeah.
And I think that that's just like, it's a never ending struggle in our industry. And I agree with Gina, like I hope it's not performative because we've just waited so long to get to this point. And you know, it's amazing to see change, but change doesn't really matter unless it's consistent. So that's the only thing I feel like I can take away from this year, because diversity is clearly on everyone's mind, but it's really going to come down to execution and whether it's sustainable.
Nice. First, I just want to thank you for those very honest answers. I feel like I come across people who don't necessarily always want to be like speaking their truth. when they're already in the industry, because I guess it's more to lose.
Yeah.
But I will say the beauty of my festival is that I think the name is pretty indicative of the type of energy that we're looking for. So we've been blessed to be in community with folks who've been very honest. And I also want to shout out Shannon Houston, who's a longtime festival supporter, and she's done a Q&A with us for kind of inspiring that question in this space, because I see a lot of Black women are really kind of thinking about things differently right now after that episode. And I also want to say, because I'm sure that episode is like a dream project, for both of you, what is a dream project that you would make tomorrow in a perfect world? You don't have to give us everything. Just, what's that thing that you kind of have been holding on when you're ready, when you feel like you're in your Ava, right? Like, I can do this because I have all of the things. Shout out to Ava. She supports our festival too. But you know what I mean? Like, when you're at that place to tell that story in the way that you want to tell it, and no one is going to tell you, that you can, and we don't have enough money for that. Like, what is that story for you?
I feel like I'm doing them for better or worse. I don't know what it is about me. I've never really listened. So people be like, oh, the market's not looking for like Black period films in the 20s featuring a Black debutante who's super rich and glamorous. And I'm like, okay, but that's what I'm making. So I'm bored with that. And so it takes me a lot longer to get stuff off the ground. But I stick with it. And I really don't know if I would advise other people to be that way, but I just singularly don't care about what people think the market is supposed to be doing right now, because if you care about that, then you're behind. And so I guess what I'm saying is what I'm making now, I can describe in very loose terms. Western miniseries based on a Black bull rider, a television show that feels a lot like the last episode of Lovecraft Country in that it's Afrofuturism and it's a genre mashup. It's Afrofuturism meets high school drama. So that's vague, but that's what it is, featuring a young Black teenage girl at the center. I am making that 1920s rich Black girl show, and also a modern love story, just about Black love in Atlanta. I'm from Atlanta. I love to feature all of the awesome, cool things that have happened in Atlanta. So a love story that takes generations for two people who've been in love for like a really long time. So they've experienced things like Freaknik for anybody who
wow.
Atlanta in the 90s. And yeah, just getting to that cultural specificity. So yeah, I'm excited. It may take everybody years to see it, but it's happening.
Period. What about you, Alliah?
Well, I've always wanted to make like a girl gang film. And I love this film, Switchblade Sisters, and I've always wanted to make a remake of it. And I know that I will make a girl gang film soon enough. And I've always wanted to tell, my parents are, my mom's Jamaican, she's Jamaican Cuban, and my dad's Egyptian. And I always loved their story of how they met, because it was just it's such a cinematic moment. Like, my mom was like recruited from Jamaica to be a model. And my dad was like a busboy at the Waverly and Diner. And like, he caught eyes with her like several times whenever she came in. And when he finally flirted with her, she like flirted back with him and then stood him up on the check. And then like didn't go back for weeks, and like went back again and like did the same thing like over and over again. And then like he just caught her one day and was like, I want to buy you a meal, but like for us to eat it together.
Ooh.
And like, just imagining like my mom is like the sassiest, like she is growing up, there are always these model photos of her all around the house, and she's just like, it's ridiculous. Like, a different version of like Lauryn Hill, and like it's insane. But like imagining them, because my dad is just like so much calmer than her. Like, just imagining how those people met, and like just their sheer differences. And they're both like, my mom was older than him, and he was like the youngest in his family, and she was the oldest in hers. That I always love immigrant stories. Mm-hmm. And they have such an interesting one that has only through like also seeing like the protests and everything have I been like reminded of so much that they went through in their own marriage together, that I think it's been something that I've been thinking a lot about, like how it would be a really interesting story that you could hear, that you could have like a love story and like also understand like just like the cultural geography of like their differences and like them coming to like New York trying to like make it, you know, like them buying a house of all things in like a very Greek neighborhood when like they couldn't, and they just look so, I mean, I always joke that they're like a box of Good Friends cereal. It's like
Good Friends cereal?
Yeah, like, oh, it's so, I'll send you a link of it, but like Good Friends cereal always has like a Caucasian person with like their ethnic friend. And like, my dad is like really light-skinned Egyptian, and my mom's like, I mean, she's gorgeous, dark Black woman. And I just can't even imagine what it was like for them at all.
Well, it sounds lovely, and I hope to see all of the projects sooner than later, hopefully, if Corona gets out the way. Okay, so let's get those questions in. If you want to throw some questions up, we can go ahead and do it. Wait a minute, though. I do know, Alliah, you had questions for Gina about Westworld.
Wait, did I? I'm like, earlier, I was like, I thought I asked her when we were doing, when I asked her last time. Okay. I was interested in how Sandy's character was like developed, and like, but you kind of already answered that. I think that's why I also was like, that was like a part of my question, because I found her character to be like, she's one of my favorite characters on the show. Like, she's the reason I watch, and I always want to see more of her. And like, there's so much about her character that I feel like is like deeply complex, that like I've always wanted to understand like the layers of like where that storyline came from, and like what aspects of like building her character did you even like put into like the actual like just makeup of her character, like the character description that you give the actor, you know, like I'm just so curious like what was in there. I mean, Thandy's also like amazing, that I'm sure whatever she read on the page, she like just black magicked out of her eyes. Like, she has such a beautiful presence. I love her. But yeah, I was just always so fascinated by her character.
Yeah, I for me at least, her character grew based off of Tandy herself. Like you're saying, she is a force of nature in real life. If you meet her, she's magnetic. She's a movie star. She's witty. She's incisive. She's intelligent. She is very passionate about various things, dealing with people of color, dealing with the downtrodden, dealing with women. And so she puts that on the screen. So you're getting back footage and for the pilot, and you're looking at how she's interpreting the lines, and you're like, okay, holy cow. Like, look at what we have. And then based on that, her character evolved and became more than what it was intended to be. But we always intended for her to be the kind of character that, rather like, you know, opposite of Dolores, who in the first season is exploring within the confines of her world and is sort of being helped along by all of these nice people, that Maeve is going it alone. She's an independent character, and she's going on a very independent journey, and she's seeing behind the scenes, and she's seeing the lies right off the bat. And so we always intended that, but when you're writing for her, you're drawing from the things Tandy has done and the energy Tandy is bringing, and it's kind of a dance between this amazing force of an actress and you trying to give her stuff that she deserves. Yeah.
It's so interesting because I'm only like halfway. I think I'm at the part where Maeve, which I don't think I ever realized what her name was. I just like Tandy Newton. Her character like wakes up backstage, I guess, and now understands or sees. And I couldn't help but kind of think, and it's really interesting that you said her character wasn't written with like ethnicity in mind, but I feel like that's such a Black female experience to like know what's going on, like know that you are actually like only able to do XYZ and know that all of these other things are happening. And also kind of having to fight for any assistance that you get. Like Dolores really is the quintessential like white damsel in distress that white women always get to be in stories. And Maeve is, you know, quite literally a sex worker, quite literally a matron and someone who has just been in this weird place where she's not quite man, not quite woman, and now she's not quite host, not quite human. So I couldn't have imagined that she would be any other race than like a Black woman. So it's really interesting that that wasn't necessarily the beginning. Okay, so we do have a few questions. If we could get the first question that came up earlier. So I think this is for Alliah. You speak on how working at an agency was very demanding, or maybe this was Gina. I think both of you. It was,
yeah.
Okay. How did you balance being an assistant and creating your own stuff?
It's tough, and you have to do it because when the opportunity comes, you can't not have the scripts ready to go. But you also have to do a really good job at your actual job, or people will not want to give you the opportunity to see your work. So what it looked like usually was, while I was working at the agency, one of my shorts was making the festival round, and I was doing a draft on an indie feature. And so usually what that would look like was I would get up, go to work. During lunch, I would run across the street to the mall where there was like a postal service, and I would send out the copies of my film that needed to be shown at whatever festival was at, run back, scarf down food, work, go home, write for a few hours, get up, do it all over again. Definitely writing on the weekends for sure. And it kind of sucks sometimes. Like I do remember being on the phone with my mom and her just being like, look, you're at the time of their life where you just have to turn the birthday party down. Like you just, and I was like, I know, but like, I feel like I'm missing out. She's like, well, you just can't go. And so it was great having parents who knew what I was trying to do and who were supporting me in that, and not being, girl, look a little, because it is tough, but you have to have the stuff ready to go when the opportunity comes. So yeah, it sucks. You don't sleep that much.
All right. Well, there you have it. Alliah, do you have anything to add?
Well, I mean, I never worked at an agency. I never like had the opportunity to make the jump to LA, but I have spent a lot of my career in post-production that I mean, a lot of the spaces I worked in have been predominantly white, that I think that's been the most difficult part of my work experience. But that's slowly changing in some ways. I think now working virtually, you don't even notice it as much until you have those group meetings and you're like, oh, wow. And that happens a lot, even with like, especially working in advertising. There are just some real moments you're like, you got a gut check. Like, I need to make this. This is not like, I do not have to stand for this thing that I'm a part of making. Like, I'm just doing the special effects. Like, there's so many other people that are responsible for this. Like, you're just doing, like, yeah, I think that's my only.
Seemed like you went to a place that got a little.
You just like, now we have like so much has changed that like, now you have the opportunity to like just speak up more and not be afraid of the judgment, because so many conversations are just already out in the open that you don't have to feel afraid of calling out a brand for doing something that you're like, that might be coming off as blatantly racist. You know, like that was a harder conversation like 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Where now everyone's trying to be on their best behavior. That like, if anything, they're like expecting you in the room to be like, I don't think that works.
And that's probably exhausting in its own way.
Totally.
Okay, we have another question. Sheila Gaskins is my mom, actually. Hi, mommy. So she's asking, are you as writers on these different shows competitors or friends at heart? And I don't know if she literally means you two or just the people that you work with in general.
I wish I was a writer on our show. Who knows, next year. But no, I mean, a writer's room, and Gina could definitely speak better to this. I can speak from an outsider's perspective. A writer's room is just like watching like a group of people in like a serious conversation. That like oftentimes like you think it might look like an argument, but it's really not. But it's just it's a loud environment where like everyone's sharing different opinions, and all these scripts are like, you know, written by one or two writers at once, but like everyone's ideas encompass it. That I don't think there's a sense of competition because everyone's there for a different reason.
Mm.
Yeah, I've been in a few different rooms. You're usually always going to have one person who is secretly competitive, who's coming at it, counting the pitches that they've made that have landed, keeping score in that way. But that doesn't serve you ever. And those people usually don't do well because they're coming into the environment from a place of fear. Whereas you have to come in from a place of friendship, like you're saying, in order for everyone to uplift each other. Because you're even on Zoom, you're staring at each other's faces for 10 hours a day. And then when you're in person, it's just compounded. You really see each other more than you see your own friends and family for a big chunk of the time. And so you have to be supportive of each other. You have to, like, you know, not throw each other under the bus, or else life is going to be hard for you. And that's not just in the room. That's like in life and in this industry. Like, you know, it's easy to see your friend succeed and you're like, ooh, I'm kind of jealous, but you have to squash that, like, because we all have to rise together. Anybody who's coming at it from, I'm going to squash you down, I'm going to lift myself up, they don't last very long, because sooner or later the story starts circulating and we start talking and we're like, did she do you like that? Yes, she did me like that too. And then those people stop being hired. So, and I, you know, worked with someone recently who very much was one of those people who was like, I will be very kind and good to the people who are important. I will be very nasty to the PAs and such. And she messed around because I look much younger than I actually am. Thought I went into the PA category. Not that she should have been doing that to anybody, because everyone's freaking like deserving of dignity and respect and doing their job and being amazing, badass people. So she shouldn't have been doing that at all. But she did it to me, and then does not know that, like, I could have hired her for something and I didn't. So be kind. I'll say that.
That's such a great word, because I think the story of LA or the industry seems to be the opposite, like traditionally at least. So I'm glad to know that that's been true for you. We have another question from Aisha Jama. What does legacy mean to you both, and how integral are your support systems to survive this industry/world?
What does legacy mean? Wow, that's a really good question.
For me, I think those two halves of the question are related, because it's easy for you to think my legacy is what ends up on the page, what ends up on screen. To me, that's not true. Your legacy is how people feel about you. So even on set, in the room, it's not just what gets made, it's how you went about making it, and the energy you put out, and the love that you show to the people who were put in your life at that time. To me, that's part of your legacy. And I desperately need my support system. I have a very supportive family who, from the beginning, had no idea what the heck I was doing, never been in the film industry, were like, what are these words? But loved everything I ever did and supported me. And I remember being like an assistant, and I was in London. So I don't know what time of night it was. It was like the middle of the night when I'm calling my dad, and I'm like crying, and I was like, I'm so stressed out and I'll never make it. And he picked up the phone. He's like, you're good. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. And like, just having somebody who's willing to do that has been invaluable. And so in turn, I feel like I'm willing to do that for anybody else, because I know what that means. And I think that's part of legacy, is being there for each other.
It's beautiful, Gina. I see why you're a writer. I'm serious though.
I like everything that Gina just said.
Yeah, Leah, how you gonna follow that up?
I know, but you know what? It is really true. Like, I stand by that. Like, I strongly believe you treat a PA the way you treat an EP, and I am always creating just work environments where people don't feel so stuck in the hierarchy that our industry perpetuates and creates within, like, the unions, and just within it becomes so easy, but only within these roles, that I personally feel like it's just such a limited way to live in any existence. Like, I felt so strongly.
I think you're breaking up, Alliah.
Oh, we've lost you.
Oh no. Okay, well. Oh, technology.
Opposed to themselves.
Oh, okay, so Gina, we missed all of that. Can you just give us like a
no.
All right, okay.
That was just me.
Right? I mean, we have 3 minutes left in this anyway. Oh no. Maybe Gina can like tweet us her response or something. Because I want to cut us off at an hour so that this can go on our IG page. Hopefully she'll be back as I'm getting us out of here. Gina, is there anything you want us to be on the lookout for you, or how can we follow you? How can we know more about what you're doing?
I feel bad because there's no way to follow me because I have been in the sci-fi world so much. I've kind of made everything private because sci-fi fans are intense and opinion.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I used to have a public Facebook page and I don't anymore because of the company.
Oh, wow. That makes sense.
Not really. Unfortunately, there's not really a way. But I'm sorry about that, guys. For me.
Okay, well, we'll definitely, keep that Gina Atwater name in the back of our heads when we're looking for our new films. I think Alliah is back briefly. We're gonna let you because we got 2 minutes left now. We just kind of want you to say what we missed out on, and then let us know how to keep up with you and or what to expect from Betty really quickly.
I just think it's really important for everyone to be treated as individuals, and everyone's opinion matters. And
the sound is a little low. Could you
I was just echoing what Gina had said earlier.
Okay.
Like, I very much value that you treat a PA the same way you treat an EP, and that you don't feed into the hierarchy that our industry instills within our departments, within the way that, like, even production works. Like, I think that everyone deserves to be respected, and that's something that, like, deeply troubled me with, like, some parts of last year that, like, we definitely, like, corrected the fuck out. I mean, sorry, the hell moment, but, like, some people aren't from, your same camp. Like, that's why I'm also so grateful that I get to work with, like, my best friend, because we can be really transparent and honest with each other and, like, call people out right in the moment. And, like, sometimes you don't have that person that you can, like, check in with. But yeah, that's what's really important for me.
Okay, so just let us know when we can catch the new season of Betty and or the past season. Like, final thoughts, where can we follow you?
So Betty is up on HBO Max and HBO Go, and the next season of Betty will hopefully be coming out in the spring. I mean, fingers crossed, right? Or the summer. And yeah, like, I'm so excited for everyone to see our girls. We have so many interesting stories coming this year. It's really exciting.
Well, thank you both. This was great. You were both joys to talk to. Thank you for being so honest and transparent. I just want to remind everyone that the festival, while our season is over, you can still follow us at that handle right there. yeah, that's it for us. Thank you so much. Until the next time, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.